Super bad as Darth Vader, and he doesn't really get as much, like you don't get to see as much of his badness in some of the movies, but how many of you have ever seen like Rogue One? Have you ever seen Rogue One, like the end of Rogue One, where he just comes in and he just goes ham, right? I'm just like, dang, Darth Vader is like really powerful and bad and evil. So Darth Vader was a serious enemy in the movies. And then, if you know who this guy is, if you've ever read Harry Potter or watched the movies, Lord Voldemort, super bad villain. A lot of our students agreed with me on this one. And then the last one comes from the Lord of the Rings, and this is Sauron. And if you've ever read the Lord of the Rings, series, he's really bad. And so, just kind of a little fun exercise. But then I asked our students this summer, I said, okay, can you name for me the 3 greatest enemies of your soul? Who are the 3 greatest enemies of your soul? And of course, the ones that have hung around New Heights for a long time, they said, well, what about the world, the flesh, and the devil? And I was like, that is 100% correct. And I said, that's what we're going to be looking at this week together. So that's where we're going for the next 3 weeks, is talking about the world, the flesh, and the devil. And these are the 3 of the deadliest enemies arrayed against us as God's people. And not just God's people, every person on the planet, these enemies come at them. And they come at them differently. For those who don't know Jesus, the world, the flesh, and the devil basically want to keep those people from seeing Jesus and coming into a relationship with him. But for us as Christians, these enemies also want to take us down and destroy us if they can. And we'll talk about why they try so hard to do that here in just a few minutes. So what we're going to talk about tonight and then the next few weeks is Romans 12:21. How can we not be overcome by evil? And it's easy, I don't know about you, but it's easy for me. I listen to the news on the radio every day. I've got news feeds on my phone. And it just seems like if you just listen and read the headlines, it's like, man, it is just bad, bad, bad. I call it the bad news roundup just every day as I'm just kind of scrolling through my phone. I'm just, man, it just seems like the forces of darkness are winning in just about everywhere you look. But is it possible for us to not be overcome by evil, but actually to go on the offensive and overcome evil with good? It's very possible, and that's why I think Romans 12:21 is there, and it's talking to us about that. So how do we do that? How do we do, as it says in Romans chapter 8, verse 37, in all things? And so when I say all things, this is the 3 enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil. When it comes to them, how can we be more than conquerors? Through him who loved us. In other words, how can we not just survive, how can we thrive with these enemies that are lined up against us? And one of the things that I have to say right off the bat here is, with each of these enemies, the tactics that you use with each of these enemies are going to be different. What I mean by that is the approaches in dealing with that enemy, it takes a different sort of plan or approach or tactic when it comes to the world, the flesh, and the devil. There's definitely some overlap, but there are also just different approaches that we need to look at. And this is the reality, is that we have to know our enemy, right? Do we have to know our enemy, know what is coming at us in order to be effective and understand what is the right tactic, what is the right approach? You may or may not know this, but I was in the military for a stretch of time before I went into full-time ministry. I spent some time in the United States Air Force. And I was actually stationed in Europe at one of our air bases in Europe, in Germany. And I'm going to date myself here just a little bit. This was during the Cold War. Okay? You're like, dang, Kevin, really? During the Cold War? Yes, it was during the Cold War. I was stationed in Germany. And we were flying spy missions. This is all declassified now, so it's okay for me to talk about this. We were flying spy missions over former Soviet bloc countries, taking pictures. And so one of actually my job, I was a weatherman. A lot of people don't know that either. So I was a weather specialist, and I was doing weather briefings for pilots who were flying spy missions. And so they would fly out and take pictures and come back. And we had very specific plans that if Europe was invaded from the east, we had very specific plans because we had studied our enemy. We knew there's a high probability that the enemy is going to invade. If it's a ground invasion, they're going to invade here and they're going to invade here, because this is basically the path of least resistance for the enemy. And so we were prepared. We had reinforcements at those entry points. And we actually had like backup plans. We're like, if they push from here to here, we're going to fall back to here and we're going to reinforce here. And so I had secret orders that were basically battle plan orders. And we all knew what to do in case we were invaded. We studied our enemy. And I think that obviously we go, well, that makes sense when it comes to the military. But does that make sense for us as Christians? Is our war just as real? And of course, again, we have to wrestle with this idea of an unseen realm or an unseen world. We're really going to lean into that on our last week of teaching when we talked about the devil and his helpers. And so that's something that I'm going to be teaching a class on next month. We're going to definitely hit it hard on week 3 of this class. But if you really want even more, I'm going to be doing a class in April called Understanding the Supernatural. And what I'm going to do in that class, Understanding the Supernatural, is I'm going to be looking at philosophy. And we'll look at the reigning philosophy that we have as North Americans or as people that live in the West. And so it's called Western rationalism. And we're going to look at why Western rationalism, generally we have a hard time with any idea of anything spiritual or supernatural. And it's just baked into our culture. It's called secularism. And so we're going to look at that worldview, and then we're going to contrast that worldview with the biblical worldview that shows that we have a material world that we live in, but just as real, there is a spirit world that is also overlapping this physical world. So we're really going to lean into that when we get to that Understanding the Supernatural class. But tonight, what we're going to do is we are going to specifically talk about the enemy of the world. And now when I say the world, do I mean this like green and blue ball of earth that we live on? Is that our enemy? Say no. Okay. It's not. It's the planet actually is a part of our stewardship. We're supposed to care for the planet. So we're not talking about just this green blue ball that we live on. A better way to define the world is to call it the world's system. The world's system. And so I want to define what I mean, and I want to kind of try to extrapolate out and distill down a biblical definition for you of the world. Because the term the world or the world system is really sort of a catch-all or a melting pot for a number of things. So I thought I had a slide for this, but I don't. But I'm going to just kind of go through each of them. Okay, so when we talk about the world, what we're talking about, or the world system, we're talking about things like cultures. Now, is culture evil? I see some of you guys shaking your heads. Culture in and of itself is not evil. Actually, culture is just something that we create. Did you know that culture actually comes out of the things that we worship and the things that we value? We will build culture around the things we worship or the things that we value. So if culture is built on worshiping and valuing God and all that He has made in our world, then culture is good. In a lot of places, culture is neutral. But we also understand that culture can move away from God and His values, can worship other things, and then culture is not a good thing. When I think about the world, we're also talking about authority structures. Again, are authority structures evil? They're not. But can authority structures, and when I think about authority structures, I'm not just talking about like political things and parties and those sorts of things, but just think about even institutionally, like schools, universities, the military, other areas where there are authority structures. Authority is a good thing, according to the Bible, but can people exercise their authority to do evil? Absolutely. So authority structures are a part of the world. What about ideas? Are ideas evil? No, absolutely not. But can ideas be weaponized against other people or against God and His ways? Absolutely. And how about values? Values are also a part of the world system. Again, we need to have values. Everybody on the planet has a set of values. The question is are they in alignment with God's values? Or is it just their selfish values, or worse, are they the devil's values? People have those too. So all of these things that I just mentioned, culture, authority structures, ideas, and values, when they become how the Bible talks about the world system, this is when those things come together and they start to move in opposition to God and His values and His ways, opposed to His kingdom. Let me give you an example of this. How many of you remember reading about in the book of Genesis, the Tower of Babel? Okay, we're familiar with the Tower of Babel. Usually what we understand with the Tower of Babel is that they were building this huge tower and they all spoke one language. And what did God do? He came in and He basically said, I'm going to scatter you guys. And so He scatters them out on the face of the earth. And all these different languages came after that. But the Tower of Babel was more than just about language. What the Tower of Babel was it was basically the deification of man early on in human history. Because what God had done is He had created Adam and Eve and all of their descendants in His image. And so as image bearers, we have incredible potential, incredible value, incredible potential. And what God wanted humanity to do was to move out of the Garden of Eden, go and fill the whole earth and create culture, create cities, create structures, all under the authority umbrella of God. And that was the original commission or the original design. You can read about that in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Genesis 1:26. God basically says, go out, humans, and rule the world and take dominion. And so that was what was expected. But there was a rebellion we know about in Genesis chapter 3. And the humanity, instead of trying to do all of those things under God and His authority, they basically moved out and rebelled. And they said, you know what, God? We're just going to do this for ourselves. It's not about your name. We're going to make a name for ourselves. And that's what the Tower of Babel is all about. And you can read about it in Genesis. It says they said literally, we want to make a name for ourselves, and we're gonna be in charge. We're not gonna obey God's command to go out and fill the earth. We're just gonna stack up here, make a name for ourselves. It's all about us. So the Tower of Babel kind of it typifies world system away from God. Now, I'm going to go all the way to the other bookend of the Bible. We're talking about Genesis. Now I'm going to go over to Revelation. And in Revelation, you see this thing called Babylon, or Babylon the Great. And what scholars say is actually Babylon is kind of a variation of Babel. But it's all the same spirit. Babylon, or Babylon the Great, is, again, it just typifies world system away from God. Does that all kind of make sense to you guys? That's just a real quick Bible overview, understanding of world and world system. So Jesus in the Gospels, He warns His followers about the dangers of the world system. Let's look at it. John chapter 15 and verse 19. Jesus said, if you belong to the world, and this is what He's kind of referring to, this system, this sort of spirit, it would love you as its own. He's talking to His disciples. He says, as it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. Now, they still live on planet Earth, but He's like, I have chosen you to come out from that world system that is away from me. And He says, that's why the world, or the world system, hates you because you no longer pledge allegiance to that system. Now you're going to pledge allegiance to me, and you're going to follow me and my plans and my designs, and you are not going to be loved at all. And so Jesus warned us that the world system is going to hate us as we follow him. And then there's some really strong language in James chapter 4, verse 4. It says, anyone who chooses, so that's interesting language. It's a choice that we can make, even as Christians. We can choose where our allegiance is. We can choose who we follow and what we align ourselves with. He says, anyone who chooses to be a friend, to get friendly with the world, becomes an enemy of God. Does that sound like pretty serious language? It's a pretty serious warning. So anybody want to be an enemy of God? I sure don't, okay? So this warning about the world and its system is very serious. So here's the reality. Every day, you and I wake up on a battlefield. And we wake up on a battlefield where there is this cosmic battle that is happening, that a lot of it is unseen. And the battlefield that we live on with these three enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil, the world system is empowered by the other two enemies, the flesh and the devil. And so you've got these three systems sort of working together. And I'm going to use some Star Trek language because I grew up with my dad being like a hardcore Trekkie. And so if you're like, I don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But there was a saying in this one Star Trek episode that basically the reality is that the world system, these three enemies, they want to assimilate you. And so they want to, in other words, absorb you into the system. Absorb you into the system and influence you and I to the point where we embrace all of those values, all of those understandings. And all of that, what it does is we take all that on, and then what the world system wants us to do, then the flesh and the devil, is basically for us with our mouth to go, we believe in all of these values, all of these ways. These are our ways. So these enemies want us basically to offer our allegiance to them rather than to God. Why? Why the battle? Why is the target on our backs? It's because our enemy, the devil, knows that if he can take us down through the world system or with our flesh, then we are going to be rendered ineffective in tearing down his kingdom. And so he goes after us and he targets us because he doesn't want us to advance God's kingdom and tear down his. We're going to look at a verse here now that I'm sure all of us know, but I want to make a couple of points about it. It's Romans chapter 12, verse 2. It says, do not be conformed to the world. Do not be conformed. Now here's a question. Is it possible for Christians to be conformed to the world? Is it possible? I see some people nodding their heads, yes. Guys, this was written to Christians in Rome. Paul wouldn't have written it if it wasn't possible to not be conformed to the world, but it's very possible for Christians to be conformed to the world. And the world will form you. It is so strong and so potent, it will form you unless you have a plan to not let it. You actually have to have a plan to not let it. But in order to not let it, you have to know what it is going to try to do to form you into its image. And so tonight, what I want to do specifically is I'm going to zero in on a particular tactic of the world's system. And it's very, very potent, and I think all of us will resonate with it and identify with it and go, yeah, that's pretty serious. And I could do a whole lot of different teaching tonight about aspects of the world and its system and its values. And I guess I could literally just say, be really careful what you take in as far as media is concerned. Can I just say, is it okay to say that this thing I'm holding in my hand here, if that's how you get most of your information, which most people do, or it could still be your television or whatever, what you take in through your ears and through your eyes is the world's greatest tactic to influence you with all of its values and all of its ways and all of its understanding. So I could just say, be really careful just what you're swiping through and what you're taking in on a daily basis. And then I could say, let's bow our heads and pray, and we could be done, right? So I think that's clear, right? That we just need, would everybody agree with me? We need to be really careful what we're taking in through the media. Say yes. Yes, okay, thank you. But what I want to do tonight specifically is I do want to focus on one particular way that the world wants to conform you to itself. And this way is one of what I'm going to call our power bases of our lives. So there's a way the world wants to get you and get me, that if it can get you, it kind of affects everything. And so what I want to do is I want to talk tonight specifically about how the world wants to form your identity. And when I say your identity, what I mean is your view of yourself. And why is this critical to talk about? Your view of yourself. Because Proverbs chapter 23, verse 7 says, as a man or a woman, as we think in our heart, so are we. You seen this before in Proverbs? It says, as you think, your imagination about yourself, how you think in your heart. And this is not just your view of yourself in your heart. It's how you view God. It's how you view yourself. It's how you view others. It's actually how you view your place in our world. But particularly your view of yourself is going to shape you deeply. Meaning this, your view of yourself is going to impact the decisions you make. Is that true? Has anybody ever made decisions based on your view of yourself? Positively or negatively? Yeah, for sure. I know I have. Your view of yourself, will it affect how you relate to others? Will it affect how you relate to God? Absolutely, it will. It will affect the choices that you make for your life. It will affect the choices you make for your future. Basically, your view of yourself will affect everything. And here's the thing, you guys. The world and its system has a set of measurements, a set of, I'll call them metrics or measurements or values. And what it wants to do is it wants you to take its set of measurements and apply those to yourself so that it just becomes very natural for you to measure yourself and your worth and your value based on its set of measurements. And so we're gonna dive into that tonight. And basically, when it comes to your view of yourself, I could say it this way: the world has a measuring stick. And what it wants you to do is it wants you just to lay that over yourself and just go, this is the best measurement, measure yourself this way. And it wants you to take that measuring stick and put it on and just start wearing it around everywhere. Kind of like your favorite hoodie, right? Or your favorite sweater. And you guys have like a favorite hoodie or sweatshirt or sweater where it's just like, yeah, I got some. I've got like my go-to shirts, you know. I call it getting into my comfies. I get home, you know, from church or whatever, and it's like, it's a race to get into my comfies. I've just got my comfy clothes. I'm just like, oh man, it's just so comfortable. The world wants you to take its measurement system and just wrap yourself all up in it and be like, this is just who I am. This is just who I am. Feels so good. And so we have to instead, you guys, do what Romans 13:14 says. It says, instead, clothe yourself with the Lord Jesus Christ. Clothe yourself with Him, and I'll just add to that, with His values, His measuring system, how He views you, how He views me. So what we're going to talk about tonight is, how do we do this? How do we actually clothe ourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ so that we're not conformed to the world and its values. Is anybody interested in this topic tonight? Does this sound like it's going to be good? Everybody go, yeah, this is going to be a good class. Come on, say it to your neighbor. This is good. I'm so glad I'm here. All right, okay, good. You guys are nice. All right, so here's what we're going to do is we're going to begin by looking at what I'm going to call the world's big 3 lies about your identity. And there are a lot of lies that are out there, but I'm going to kind of just pick on the 3 biggest ones. So the world will tell you that your identity is all about your appearance. True or false? Absolutely true. I haven't looked at the stats recently, but you guys, when it comes to your appearance, now when I think about your appearance, I'm thinking about all the dollars that are spent on diets, exercise programs, clothing, makeup, hair, fashion, all of those things. If you start adding that up, it's larger than the GDP of a lot of countries. It's massive, the amount of money that our world system puts into making you look how it says you should look. And why do we want to look so awesome? For most of us, we're like, because we want people to think we look nice. This is a big deal, obviously, if you've ever been a teenager, right? You just want to be cool. You just want to fit in. You just want to be like the cool kids. So my kids ask me for the $200 tennis shoes. And I'm like, no, you're not going to get those, right? You're going to get the $40, whatevers. You don't need the latest and the greatest. But Dad, you don't understand. All the cool kids have that stuff. Why can't I? Okay, none of you ever did that to your parents, right? I'm sure you never did that. But so much of our identity in our world system says it's how you appear. Now, I just have to say, I'm not teaching don't take care of yourself. Just let yourself go. Stop shaving. Stop bathing. Don't worry about your hair. Just look like a bum. I'm not saying that, okay? Please do take care of yourself. I think that's important. And I'm not saying that fashion isn't bad. Like, it's okay for you to be attracted to certain fashions and to go, that looks nice. Or when I see him wearing that or her wearing that, like when my wife, she works for Beautiful Lives Boutique, which is amazing because she gets all these really nice women's clothes for next to nothing. So I'm like, man, I love your wardrobe, sweetheart. And so I like it when she dresses up and we go out and all that. So I'm not saying, don't worry about yourself, but can we start to have negative effects in our soul? This is where it starts to wage war against our soul, where we start to get depressed, or we start to feel anxious, or we start to feel less than when somebody prettier walks into the room, or somebody thinner walks into the room. Or I talk to college guys a lot, you're in the gym and you kind of got your shirt, sleeve, like, you're looking in the mirror and everything and you're working. And then a guy who comes in and he's just more jacked than you are. And you're like, oh man, baby arms, what's the problem here? Because here's the thing, you guys. Why is building your identity on your appearance, why is that shaky ground? Why is that shaky ground to build on? There's always somebody better, and I heard you say that, Joe. It changes, right? We're all going to get older. Gravity is going to happen to us. It just is. So it's really shaky ground to build ourselves on our identity, but the world wants to convince you it's all about your appearance, and you can do it. Performance. Now, performance is another thing that the world says that you are how you perform. And we have accepted this lie so much that we don't even hardly think about it. How many of you grew up in a family where sports or grades was your basis for success in your family? And you were celebrated if you were achieving in sports or success, and it wasn't so great if you weren't achieving in sports. Or I meant success, I meant like grades, academics. So in my family, in the Rusak family, this was a losing battle for me because all of my cousins were geniuses. I have a cousin, she's got a 160 IQ. She graduated from Harvard with a law degree. My cousins are doctors and lawyers, and I mean, just high achieving. They were amazing athletes. And so as a teenager, I was like, do I run to try to keep up with that race and to prove my worth and my value and get all the accolades of my family? I basically rebelled and went the other way, and I was like, I don't care about your system. And so that was actually why I got into so much trouble as a teenager, because I was like, I'm not a part of that. When it comes to performance, you guys, even beyond our teenage years, and it comes to academics and sports and all of that, what about performance when it comes to your career? And we start to measure ourselves in the business world by our position, our title, how big our corner office is, how many people we control, and my financial bottom line. And the toys that I have. And then you start to go, I'm feeling good about myself if I'm keeping up with the Joneses, if I'm climbing the corporate ladder, if I'm hitting all of the metrics that the world says success is all about. Are you guys with me that this is a system? And it will suck the life out of you if you let it. And the enemy and your flesh will just keep pumping that thing up. What's the problem with trying to build your identity on your performance? Yeah, I can hear the answer. Several of you have saying the same thing. You know, what happens when you can't perform up to what you think you should be performing? I think a lot of depression starts to hit us that way, where it's like, I can't perform. What if you get sick? You know, what if you have health issues, or somebody in the company outperforms you and all of a sudden you're demoted, or worse than that, you're let go because you can't perform and you can't keep up. And isn't this where our world lives? I mean, this is high anxiety that we're talking about here. And so there will come a time when you can't perform like you think you should or like others think you should. And so it's shaky ground. And then the opinions of others. Again, the appearance and the performance, really opinions of others are sort of it's blended into that, because we just kind of go, I'm feeling good about myself if the people around me are feeling good about me. But what if all of a sudden, like in my situation, my family members didn't think very much of me because I wasn't performing like the others, were performing. And man, I'm telling you, my self-esteem tanked. And I was an incredibly insecure kid and teenager. Let me ask this question, you guys. How does this play out if you don't decide to get off the ride that the world offers you? Because it's like a merry-go-round, and the world is just going to keep coming at you with this, and coming at you with this, and coming at you with this, and these messages. How does it play out if you just stay on this ride and just keep measuring yourself by the world's metrics and measurements? How's that going to play out in 10, 20, 30, 40 years for you? This is where you see a lot of people, and I've walked with people, and I've walked with people who have been on this ride for decades, who have crashed and burned, and they're toast, and it's exhausting. And they're all broken into bits. I want to do something kind of interesting here before we take our first break, or really it's going to be our only break tonight. But I want to do a compare-contrast thing with a couple of people. And these are people, historic people, they're not fictional. And it's going to be kind of a weird compare-contrast, all right? When I was a kid, there was a singer. She was pretty popular back in the day. Anybody tell me who that is? Well, I guess it says her name right there, right? Okay, yeah. All right. So Madonna was kind of a big deal when I was a teenager. All right, pop singer and kind of cultural icon and all this stuff. And she was kind of a big deal back in the 80s. In Vogue magazine, she was interviewed, and they were asking her about her life, and they were asking her about her drive in life. And it was really, really interesting what answers she gave. And I want to put it up here on the screen and read it for us, because I think it really gives us insight into, if you just keep riding this merry-go-round, year after year after year, this is maybe where you can find yourself. So here's what Madonna says about herself. She says, my drive in life comes from a fear of being mediocre. Do you already hear it just right there? Performance, appearance, opinions of others. She is in this. And she says it's a fear and it's driving her. She says, I fear being mediocre. And she says, it's always pushing me. I push past one spell of it. And then I discover myself as a special human being. So she's trying just to measure herself and keep doing and keep performing. And she's like, I kind of get there. I feel special. But it doesn't last. She says, but then I feel that I'm still mediocre and uninteresting unless I do something else. It's like I have to outdo my last thing. I have to outdo my last success or whatever. She says, because even though I have become somebody, I still have to prove that I am somebody. My struggle has never ended, and I guess it never will. What do you think about that, guys? How do you feel for Madonna? Pretty bad, yeah. I feel sad for anybody else with me. I kind of feel, I'm sad. I'm like, I would love for you just to get freedom from this. To me, this sounds exhausting. Does that sound exhausting to you? It sounds miserable. It sounds exhausting. How many billions of people in our world, maybe they're not as bad as Madonna, but they still feel that push. They still feel that pressure. They're trying and they're trying and they're trying to measure themselves by the world's measurements and system. And just like this, my struggle has never ended. I guess it never will. Is this how God views us? Is this how we need to view ourselves? So here's what I want to do. I said I'd compare contrast. So I want to compare Madonna with a character from the Bible. I want to compare Madonna to the Apostle Paul for a minute. Doesn't that sound like kind of a fun comparison? How does the Apostle Paul think about himself and measure himself? So let's look at it. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, I'm not going to put the whole chapter up there, but I'm going to kind of get us into it just a little bit, just a few verses. Paul goes on, but I'm just going to keep it short here. Listen to Paul's view of himself. He goes, I care very little. Right there, I think there's an insight. He's like, you know what? When it comes to the opinions of people, he's like, people's opinions of me are way down here. He's not saying I don't give a rip and I don't care at all, but he goes, I care very little if I'm judged by you or any human court. Now, don't be thrown by the word judged there. Really, a better translation, I think, is I care very little if how I'm measured by you or any human court. Because what was going on with the Corinthians is you had, and again, I told you, he wrote to the Romans, he said, Christians, don't be conformed to the world. This was happening in the church in Corinth. The church in Corinth was struggling with worldliness. They actually were struggling with fleshiness, which we're going to talk about next week. And they were really a struggling church, the Corinthian church. What they were doing is they were comparing all of the apostles amongst the other apostles. Kind of like how we sometimes do with preachers or podcasters. It's like, man, this podcaster, this guy, this gal, man, they are the best. They're amazing. They're awesome. They're better than your pastor. Or, my podcaster is better than your podcaster or whatever. It's like they were measuring the Apostle Paul with all these other apostles. And he basically was like, I'm not having a part of your system. So he goes, I care very little if I'm measured or judged by you or any human court. And then check this out. He takes it deeper and he goes, I don't even judge myself. That's kind of interesting. He's like, basically what he's trying to say is, I don't even trust my measurements of myself. I don't trust the world's measuring stick, and I'm not sure if my measuring stick of myself is actually really accurate either. But he says, you know whose measuring stick is really accurate? He says, the Lord. I want the Lord's system to be the one that defines and measures and speaks to me about my value. It's the Lord who judges, or the Lord who measures me. So how does the Lord measure us? I'm going to share just a couple more verses and then we'll take our break here. We get some real insight into how the Lord measures you and the Lord measures me in 1 Samuel chapter 16. So in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verses 6 and 7, this is talking about King David getting ready to be anointed king by the prophet Samuel. So let me just set it up before I read the verses. Samuel the prophet has been told by the Lord, King Saul is no longer going to be the king of Israel. I'm going to send you to go anoint the next king of Israel. He sends him to this town called Bethlehem. He says, you're going to meet this guy named Jesse. One of his sons, he's got 12 of them, one of his sons is going to be the next king of Israel. So Samuel, the great prophet of God, shows up on the scene. And here's how it plays out. It says, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought. Now let me pause here. Eliab was Jesse's oldest son. He was the firstborn, the oldest. Samuel goes, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. Let me pause right there. Here's what I think was going on with Samuel. Eliab looked awesome. I think Eliab was probably strong. He was probably tall. He was probably captain of the football team. He looked awesome. And so Samuel, he just kind of flipped for a minute and started thinking with worldly perspective. But here's what the Lord says to Samuel. He says, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. Man, how would you like the Lord to say that about you? It's like, what if you're prom queen? What if you're head of the class? What if you've got the biggest corner office? You're killing it in the eyes of the world, but the Lord goes, I am not impressed at all. Would you rather have the smile of God and the frown of man, or the frown of man and the smile of God? I think I want God's smile. Can I have man's too? Can I get them both, please? Is that good? I'd like you to be happy with me, and I definitely want God to be happy with me. But anyway, the Lord says to Samuel, he says, don't look at his appearance or his height, because I've rejected him. And then here's the Lord's measuring stick. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at outward appearance. The Lord looks at the heart. He's looking at your heart. He's looking at the real you that is on the inside. He's looking at the things that as you think in your heart, who you are in your heart, it affects everything in your life. And I know this is kind of a duh, but what God says about you and he says about me is more important than what the world says, or even at times what I say about me. So I want to keep talking about this truth of putting God's view of us on ourselves. And that's where we're going to go for the rest of our class after our break. Is I'm going to start talking about very specifically, how do you put on God's view of you that will keep you from being conformed to the world and putting the world on